Welcome to the show. I'm Andre Holmes. On this edition of Roundtable, our topic A is Black male identity. Scholar and activist Pat Walker once said, "The day all of the different parts of me can come along, we would have what I call a revolution." Well, today we're dealing with the revolutionary topic of a not so often talked about segment of black men. That is, black men who identify as gay or same gender loving. Hold tight. I know I done rocked a couple feathers out there, but if you just stay with an open mind, you might learn something. Take a break and come back.
How do you know? No cages, no crates, no tie stalls, no painful living conditions. How do you know? No hormones or antibiotics in feed. How can you know? Your choice is wholesome and humane. Did you know choosing natural foods raised in humane conditions promotes farm animal well-being as well as yours and your family? When you choose Certified Humane, everyone benefits. For more information about Certified Humane, visit their website at certifiedhumane.org.
The police called after midnight when they caught our son at a drinking party. It was a real wake-up call. My wife and I are really worried. We don't know if our son has a serious problem or if he's just hanging around with the wrong crowd. How do we know what to do? The police officer who brought our son home suggested we try Al-Anon family groups. He said it might help to hear how other parents are dealing with alcohol problems. I didn't want to go to an Al-Anon meeting. I didn't want anyone to think we had problems like that. And I didn't think our son's problem was that bad. When I decided to give Al-Anon a try, I found it was a safe place that keeps your problems private. It was very helpful. Are you troubled by someone else's drinking? You might be surprised at what you could learn in an Al-Anon family group from people just like you. Call 1-888-4-AL-ANON or go to alanon.org.
Thank you for returning. I'm Andre Holmes. Our topic A in this edition of the Roundtable is Black male identity and sexual diversity. And joining me now are two experts on the topic of what it is like to be both black and gay in America. On my left, I have author Harrell Chisholm, but he just goes by Harrell.
Yes.
He is author of Church Boy in the Dark and is a businessman. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
On my right is Mr. Craig the Writer Stewart, author of not one but two books. The first one is Words Never Spoken, a memoir, and the sequel that just was released recently is
One Thing for Certain, Two Things for Sure, a memoir continued.
Thank you for joining me.
Yeah, thank you.
So, you know, like I said, we done rocked some feathers because anytime you mention black gay men, people don't think that he doesn't even exist.
Right.
That was something the white people do. That ain't natural.
Right.
It's not this, it's not that. But how about this, folks? According to a report by the Gallup just earlier this year, 4.6% of African Americans responded yes when asked if they identify as gay, lesbian, bisexual, or transgender. But the kicker is that 4.6% is actually higher than other ethnic groups. Caucasians identified at 3.2% of the population. Asians with 4.3%. Hispanics were 4%. So again, a minor difference, but definitely it debunks the myth that being black, gay, or same gender loving, and we'll talk about these terms as we go on because we're black people. Some of y'all don't like the word African American. Don't call my grandmother African American. She says point blank, I'm black, okay? So when you're dealing with same gender loving men, they have different terms that they would prefer to be called and different acknowledgement. You have to honor how people want to be called. That's the first sign of freedom, is being able to choose to identify how you want to be labeled. But let's get right into this discussion. So I done gave the primer. I'm gonna toss it to, we're gonna do age before beauty. So, Harrell.
Mm-hmm.
Would you say you came of age in the 70s or more 80s?
I would say I came of age in the 80s.
In the 80s.
Mm-hmm.
When you were growing up, how did you come to know that you were different from the other boys in the neighborhood?
I wouldn't consider myself to be different than them because I did the same things that the little boys did for identity purposes. So my difference was, I guess, masked because I knew I had a difference. And I think a lot of times with us, we know that there's a difference, and we can mask it by the company we keep, the friends we hang out with, and the association. You know, so for me, there was not a difference until I actually wanted to identify with my sexuality. That's when I allowed the difference to show.
So when you hit puberty?
Right around about 15.
About 15?
Yeah.
All right. What about you, Craig?
Wow. I was 22 when I actually began to walk my truth. It wasn't until I actually graduated from college, moved here to Atlanta, and I started to explore my sexuality. But I always knew that it was there. It was a part of it. It was an extension of who I am as a person, but it was just definitely something that I hid from, I tried to suppress. It was something that I did not want to acknowledge. And I think that that's a part of the journey for most gay people, whether you're black, white, Latino, whatever it is. I think that's a part of the journey, is you try to understand it, because you don't really understand the feelings, especially when those feelings collide with puberty. So for me, it was just one of those things that I tried to suppress and I thought it would go away. And so I had girlfriends. My last girlfriend was in college. And I think about it a lot. You know, I could have taken that same path and gotten married and had kids, but I just knew that I needed to live my truth and stand in my truth.
What's interesting to me, you say 15, you say 22.
I was 22, yeah.
Let me tell you, Andre was about 5 years old, and my grandmother point blank looked at me one day and said, "You got a spirit in you. And if you pray to God, it will go away." But there's something. And so at a very early age for me, I knew the way she made it sound. I didn't know what a spirit was, and I didn't know all that was inside of me, but it didn't sound too good what she was saying.
Well, let's be clear.
And I love my grandmother to
Be
death.
clear, I knew. I mean, I didn't come out until 22. I didn't have my
Okay.
first experience until 22, but I absolutely knew
Okay.
at a very early age. I mean, I probably was 5, 7,
Six.
somewhere in there, but
06.
Okay.
yeah, I definitely knew.
Okay.
I always knew that it was there.
Okay.
Yeah, sexuality, identity, I think is something that we experience very, very young as children. Whether we identify with it, well, you haven't reached puberty yet. Your hormones haven't developed. So sexually, you're not sure where you stand. But the sexuality identity, I think we get that early on, because you know as a little boy if you like that little girl. You know as a little girl if you like that little girl. You know, you just know that inside. It's a natural thing. And it happens to us very, very young. You can't verbalize it. And I think that's where a lot of misconception comes in with the choice thing. You know, people saying that it's a choice. Because a child does not know how to verbalize this feeling that they have for the same sex, same gender, it's hard for them to actually say, okay, I know what I'm going to become. Whereas now when they're older and they start to identify, then you said they made a choice. And that's really not what happened.
And what's interesting, though, is when you talk about it, even though that message was there, like you said, you're just doing you as a kid. I'm still playing, I'm still around my cousins, but everybody around me is letting me know that there's something not quite right about this little boy. Because I was the one, I would kind of walk on my tippy toes sometimes. And it got to the point where my mother was just like, "I think you're around too many women." You know what I'm saying? I think it's, you know, you kind of need to be, my background, my father didn't marry my mother. So I was in primary custody of my mother, and I would go see my father like on the weekends. But, and then he got to the point where he just moved, him and his new wife, they moved away to a different state. And long story short, she was going through some things, and she just got to a place where she couldn't deal with motherhood. But a part of what she was also dealing with is she was seeing this very effeminate child, and it was concerning her. And one of her solutions was, I think it's time to kind of go with your father and be around your father.
Well, you know, to the point that Harrell made earlier, sexuality, it's instinctive. It's a part of how we're wired. It's not decided. It's not a decision. So, you know, to your point, you know, that your mom thought it was time that perhaps your father raised you from that point on. It's not. There's this idea that it's learned, and it's not a learned behavior.
Mm-hmm. Now, what many people, another thing that will goes hand in hand, and I don't mean to be in anybody's personal business, but I have to put it out there. There's a feeling that child molestation and being sexually violated at a very early age will make one choose to want to be with the opposite sex. Again, not trying to be in your business, but how do you feel about that kind of belief?
I addressed that a little bit in my book, and I discuss it in the realm of the cases that we read about mostly regarding pedophiles are regarding heterosexual Caucasian men. That's where we get the majority of that from. So to place that on a whole nother community based upon sexuality, I think is very unfair. Because first, what you're saying is, not only do I like men, but I like children too. And I think that part should always be separate, because you don't find gay men being prosecuted for the rape of a little boy. You don't find lesbian women being prosecuted for the rape of a little girl, or the molestation of a little girl. That's not what we're finding in our community. That's not what we're reading on the dockets. I'm a paralegal. I don't see those court cases coming through. But what I do see is Caucasian men being put on these lists and not being able to live a certain feet from schools, but we're not discussing them, and that's where the issue is. We're remiss when we're bringing it to our community. So to me, I don't even think it should be a topic that's addressed and put into the same discussion.
Hold
with our
that thought
community.
right there. We got to take a break.
Sure.
Like I said, stay with an open mind. You just may learn something. This edition of the Roundtable is dealing with Black male identity.
Go to helpbears.org to sign the petition to save polar bears. www.helpbears.org.
Food. It nourishes, brings us together, and adds flavor to life. That's why it's important to wash hands, surfaces, and fresh produce. Keep raw meat, poultry, and seafood separate from ready-to-eat foods like fruits and vegetables. And cook to proper temperatures using a food thermometer. Enjoy! And refrigerate leftovers within 2 hours. For more tips on safely preparing foods, visit homefoodsafety.org.
Thank you for returning. If you're new to the program, we're dealing with Black male identity and sexual diversity. There was a recent study done that basically pointed to the fact that more African Americans are identifying as gay, lesbian, transgender, same gender loving, however they choose to self-identify. The bottom line is that this is a often neglected and marginalized community, and we don't talk about in the umbrella of Black folks. There'll be let me just take a step back. This October will be the 20th anniversary of the Million Man March. And Louis Farrakhan did a wonderful job in the last 2 marches of making sure there was representation from Black gay folk. So as we near that time and as we kind of celebrate and commemorate that powerful march and demonstration of Black male bonding and love, we want to again put the focus on what is being done to address the fact that we do have a significant population that is increasingly demonstrating more political influence. They are running companies, they are taking care of families, and we want to bring you the kind of inner workings with 2 experts who have written about the topic. So I couldn't be more happy with the guests joining me. You just last heard, if you were in the program in the beginning, Mr. Harrell who is author of Church Boy in the Dark. And what we were discussing is there's oftentimes a view that sometimes some people are attracted to the same sex because they were violated as children or molested or raped. So I was having him give his thoughts on that, and you were finishing up and saying.
Well, I would like to add actually that a lot of us, our experiences were not that we were molested or raped. I think that is a story that people would like to believe a lot of times. A lot of times people will look for excuses. There's something that happened to me at 16. I can easily say that I was raped because I was drugged, but I arrived to the location. I knew that where I was going, that there was
You knew the potential for
there
sex
was a
could
potential
happen.
that sex could happen. So based upon the way it happened, you can't rape the willing, so to speak. And just because that was my first sexual experience, I'm not going to say that that's the reason why I'm a gay male.
Okay.
I was a gay male before I arrived.
Hold up, I want to get Craig on this conversation. What do you think about it?
Well, I think that it's interesting. I was not molested. I was never raped. And I believe that one has nothing to do with the other. I believe that, again, sexuality is instinctive. It is, it's innate, it's inherent. So I believe that whatever your path was going to be your path. I do, however, believe that there are people who have been molested, there have been people who have been raped, who sometimes are confused sexually and sometimes are conflicted because of that type of incident happening in their life. So I do think there's a period where people sometimes are confused and they may go through this period where they're unsure, but I believe that from the beginning you were either heterosexual or not. But I also think that sexuality is a continuum, so I do not believe that every single person is 100% straight, 100% gay. I do believe that there are people that are bisexual. I think that there's a spectrum.
And so when we talk about this spectrum, what's always interesting is you can't go too far in the black community without stopping by a black church. So historically, we know that the church has a long-standing view of the sexuality in general. And we know what those parameters have been, sermons about Jezebel, and we know the fall of Solomon was because the concubine that he had and he began to worship their gods. And we grow up kind of with this Western view of sexuality as if it is the greatest temptation. And so I guess if there's anything that makes you, quote unquote, you have a form of sex that is outside of man and woman, and definitely outside of marriage, we know where the churches has historically been with that viewpoint. For you all, what has been your experience with navigating the waters of the black church, and how has that informed your maturity and your development as men?
Well, for me, I think that, and I write extensively about this, but I think that many of us, when we're talking about black gay men, come into this community, and I don't use the word lifestyle because I don't believe that being gay is a lifestyle.
Say that again.
I don't use the word lifestyle because I don't believe that being gay is a lifestyle, but when we come into this community as black gay men, I believe that many of us come into this community with a brokenness, and I believe that an emotional brokenness, and I think that brokenness can be attached to the black church, the black family, and the black community. Being called sissy punk by family members sometimes, friends, community leaders, whatever the case is. And I believe that most of us spend a considerable amount of time when we're in the closet, this proverbial closet, we spend a considerable amount of time trying to sneak, cheat, lie, and hide about who we are. And so when we finally do come out of the closet and come into this community, we still carry the shame of that. And so for me, it was years of going to churches and hearing that it was wrong to be gay and you were going to hell. I think that's ultimately why most of us—
abomination.
Absolutely, and I think that's why most of us spend so much time trying to be something other than who we are, who we were created to be. I believe that's why there's this phenomena of DL men or down low men or straight identified gay men, if you will. So there's a reason for all of it.
Yeah. My debate with the church with the issue of homosexuality is this. and I discuss it in my book. If we're going to quote unquote consider homosexuality a sin, then we have to consider heterosexuality a sin, because heterosexual is your birthright. That's, you were born heterosexual. If a person is born homosexual, they're not sinning because I was born. I'm sinning because I'm having sex outside of marriage, because you said fornication is the sin. So my debate with the church has always been, what are you considering a sin? Because if I don't ever have sex at all, and I'm just asexual, am I sinning? But I'm still going to identify the way I was born, because when I think about any type of love or emotional connection to another human being, that thought is with a male for me. So am I now sinning because of my thoughts? Because that's my whole debate. Because if that's the case, then now that we have gay marriage, then the church should not have a problem with the salvation, so to speak, of a homosexual born person, because now that person is not fornicating as long as they can get married, which means I'm not held under the sin or under the law of the sin of fornication. You see, so that's been my debate with the church, is what is considered a sin if I'm a homosexual male, because I'm not sinning just because I'm homosexual.
Got you. So let me bring it more closer to home. How did you tell your mother or your caregiver about your sexuality? How did that experience
For me,
go
it was
down?
because of a relationship. The first guy that I actually fell in love with wanted to have Thanksgiving. He wanted to prepare Thanksgiving dinner. It was the first year that I had moved to Atlanta right after college. And he wanted to cook dinner, and my mom wanted to come and visit because it was my first year living here. Mm-hmm. And so I was kind of compelled to tell her, because I was, feeling...
Guess who's coming to dinner?
Absolutely. And so I didn't want to surprise her, and he wanted to just come and, we just pretended that we were friends, but body language is everything, and even if we never touched or kissed or showed any type of affection, but just our interaction would have, tipped her off. And so I wanted to be honest with her, and so I told her, and it was not a very good experience. It was not a very good experience, but she has grown, and I've learned that it took me 22 years to come out and actually start to walk in my truth. I couldn't expect her to be okay in 2 weeks. So I learned
that again.
Right, I learned that I had to spoon feed her. I couldn't expect her to come around and be okay with it right away, just because I had the courage to finally tell her.
I think what happens that we forget is that as children, our parents have a dream.
They have a dream
for us, and there is a vision that every parent has for their child, and when you kind of are different from that,
right. You
deviate from it, and that could be anything.
Yeah,
with anything.
But they want you to be a doctor, but you go for
time.
Yeah.
They're going to need that time to adjust.
Right, and like for my mom, it was like she always knew, because once we actually had the conversation, but it was the reality of me telling her that actually changed it for her, because she could never pretend not to know again. She could never pretend not to know the truth, because I gave it to her. So it's one thing to think it and believe it and feel it, but when I actually tell her, there's no way that she can ever pretend that it isn't the case.
We're going to head into a break, but if you do want more information about where you can get these books, because these men do talk about these things in their respective books, we have some information on the screen that'll help you with it. The first book, of course, is by Harrell, Church Boy in the Dark, and then there's another set of books by Craig Stewart. The first one is Words Never Spoken, and the second one is One Thing for Certain, Two Things for Sure.
Yes.
Did I get that right?
That's it.
How about that?
That's it.
So when we come back, grab yourself a little drink, grab yourself a snack. How about you bring some more people into the conversation? And we eventually want to hear from you. So if you have any questions, I give you the email address that you can contact us. You don't want to miss what we're about to do next.
We cannot approve the loan until your wife goes back to work. I'm sorry.
Housing discrimination isn't always obvious or straightforward, but it is against the law. The U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, HUD, protects your rights to equal opportunity in housing.
If you've experienced housing discrimination, HUD can help. They can pursue compensation for your injuries and protect your equal opportunity to housing free of discrimination.
We're back, and all the good stuff always happens during the break. So my man over here, Craig Stewart, was saying that oftentimes we're resisting our sexuality because...
We are resisting our sexuality because we've been taught, we've been conditioned to believe that it is wrong to be gay, and we all have this idea of what it looks like to be gay and what it means to be gay before we even come into this community. For me, I thought it meant that at some point down the line that I wanted to be a woman, or I had to become a woman, or had to move and carry myself in a certain way. So I think that's a part of the resistance that's there as well, aside from worrying about what society is going to think, what family will think, what coworkers will think. So I think we all just kind of have this idea, because I know, like with my parents, they all kind of thought that because I identified as gay, that some point down the line that I would also become HIV positive, as if as if they're one and the same.
Or sometimes they think you're going to get bashed,
Absolutely.
and somebody's going to kill you.
Absolutely.
Some of the concern is a natural fear
Right.
that some people have. Harrell, we were talking a little bit before he brought up that point. We were just talking about how did you tell your parents or whatever. What was the journey like for you in terms of the talk?
Well, my parents, I had to kind of plot and plan how I was going to do it with them, because my dad was a New York City police officer, my mom was a nurse. They both worked the night shift, so I didn't have parents at night. So the one time I waited was when it was 2 o'clock in the morning, a day off, when I had them both home, and I said I was just going to wake them up in the middle of the night, because I know that's when they're normally up, and it would be easier to get their, have their attention. So I waited till about 2 o'clock in the morning. I was 15 years old. I went upstairs and I woke up my mom first, and I said, "Mom, I have something to tell you." And she said, "What is it?" I said, "I believe that I'm going to be with a man in a relationship one day because I know that I'm gay." And that's exactly what I said to her. Because of the relationship thing that they will always want you to have a girlfriend. So I said, "I believe I'm going to be in a relationship with a man one day." And she woke my dad up, she tapped him, and she said, "I need you to hear this." And he sat up, and at that point I addressed it to him. The only thing that bothered me about it was, one thing she said was, "I love you, you're my son, that's never going to change. I have no problems with your sexuality." The only problem that I had with that conversation was when my dad said, "The only thing that I want is, I don't want you to be feminine. As long as you carry yourself as a masculine male, and you'll be fine. And, I won't have no problems with your sexuality. What you do behind closed doors is your business." I said to my dad, "What do you think? I'm going to go down the steps and immediately become feminine? This is who I am. I'm not going to change. I already know that. I'm just letting you know, that don't look for no grandchildren. Don't look for no, things like that."
But you raise an interesting point, because first of all, I don't buy the notion that black people are any more homophobic than any other ethnic group. I think that because of the lens and the glare of racism and that concern, that there's a concern that you don't want to draw further attention. You don't want to add another strike to you. And so how we navigate as a community sexuality is very different. But I hate when we're labeled more homophobic than other groups, because, like I said, I don't just believe that. Now, what I will say is, because of racism, your dad was bringing up an interesting point. When you look at the images of strong black men have been emasculated in this country for years. And so there is a concern among our people in particular. We do want to see strong black women, strong black men. And there's nothing wrong with that, because we know all the lies that people have told us about ourselves as black people: monkeys, apes, inferior, we're less intelligent, all of that. I hear the concern of black people saying, where the sexuality piece, because it is different, becomes problematic for them, because they're so rooting for us to be, quote unquote, strong and at our best.
That's a problem right there in itself, because what constitutes my sexuality, meaning to me that I'm going to be a weak man because I'm gay, or that I'm not going to be a good parent because I'm gay, or I can't raise children in the same household with my partner because I'm gay. I think that homophobic thing in the church is not so much a homophobia as it is, like I call it the church police. You're policing, using the Bible to police other people's lives. I don't think it's a homophobic thing in the church. I think the church, we've been taught that you need to be saved, and you have to have this, and this is what the Word of God said. And we use all these different little colloquies and everything and cliches to hide how we actually really feel about sexuality. I don't think it's homophobic. I think it's just what it is the church does.
Poor biblical teaching.
Poor biblical teaching.
But to your point, I do think that the point that you raise is valid in terms of our community, the black community, wanting to see black men excel and not have another strike against them. I think that is one of the caveats, but I do believe that it is also because the majority of us as a people, black people, we believe in what's written in the Bible. We believe what we're taught every single Sunday. It's a tradition. So most black people who are quote unquote religious, because there's a difference between spirituality and religious, most black folks only go off of what they've been taught. They're not going off of what they know for themselves. So it's not just about black gay men undoing this conditioning of a belief that it's wrong to be gay, but it's also about the black community reteaching themselves, reteaching, the black community that everything that you've been taught by the church and in the church isn't necessarily the case. Because religion has always been about power and control.
Right.
So I actually did a book signing recently in Houston, and the person who hosted this signing said to me she had read like a series of, she took a year out of her life and read like a series of memoirs and autobiographies, and there was she quoted Nelson Mandela in saying that I've never been a religious person. I've always been a spiritual person, but I've never been a religious person. And when white folks came to the land, they had the Bible. But when white folks left the land, we were holding the Bible and they had the land.
Right.
So it really is about us as a community, as a people, thinking critically and having honest kind of conversations about sexuality.
And knowing the history behind it. There's a gentleman, some of you may know, Mr. Cleo Manago. He is a gentleman who does a lot of work in the area. Actually, the term same-gender loving is a coin that comes out of his it's called cultural affirmation and critical thinking, a model to help people deal with these internalized oppression and internalized homophobia. And what he often talks about when you go through one of his workshops is how historically African traditions dealt with what they considered, in some, Africa's a big place, but in particular, there was one tribe, and I don't know the name of it right now. They looked at the people who were same-gender loving, or what we call today, as dual-spirited. And some of these people, they were called Adodi, and they were looked at as the wise people in the community. And what would happen is they would take care of the orphans. The women would come to them with their relationship issues with men. The men would come and talk about their relationship issues with women. And when you go through a lot of cultures, whether it's Native Americans or other kinds of ethnicities, you will find that there's nothing new under the sun. And yes, the dynamic shifts when Christianity is thrusted upon these native groups and these native people. So that's an interesting point that you raised that made me think about that. Think about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that if we begin to have honest conversations about sexuality in this country, in the black community, that is, we can really start to have conversations around HIV and AIDS, sexuality, but the black church is really at the helm of that. They really can change the game, so to speak, because they are responsible for the beliefs of the majority of...
But how about this? And I raised this at your book signing the other day. We talk about these institutions like we're not a part of them. What I said at the signing is, there would be no black church without the black gay and lesbian people.
Absolutely.
Your choir director that brings in the money for you to have offering every Sunday. The deacon and usher board and the mothers. We're there. But oftentimes we feel like we have to choose between being black and the sexuality that we have. And so we often go into our institutions only showing up as our black self.
It really is a dysfunctional relationship when you think about it.
It is a dysfunctional relationship.
The relationship that black gay people have with the church. You know, because we're offering our services and our time and our talent, but yet being besmirched and
participate in the
denigrated.
hate.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
We'll be the first one.
But it's a dysfunctional relationship, and sometimes we are drawn to dysfunctional relationships. It's just that simple.
That is, that's funny that you said that we're drawn to dysfunctional relationships, because I do feel like a lot of times that's why you keep going back, in a sense, because you're looking for a different result, going to the same place, and acceptance at the same time. Because a lot of times, like the minister of music, he's flamboyant, he may be out there jumping up and down, and nobody's gonna sit him down or tone him down, but he's there looking for acceptance in his own right, you know, so he's not gonna tone down, he's not gonna change, that's just who he is. And to me, he's almost like, I would say, the image that everybody expects other men to represent. If you're a gay male, that's who you look like. That's how we identify the church gay male, the guy that looks like him and acts like him. So the guy who dresses a certain way in church, looks a certain way, that's the one that everybody goes and looks at and snickers at. And it's a horrible feeling to sit in a church and be classified and identified based upon fashion as he must be gay because he dresses like the minister of music. Because that's their image of a gay male, is the minister of music. That's who women go to church and look at and say, that's what a gay male looks like.
Or we're used to seeing, you bring up a good point, the gay stylist in the salon who is beating the face, and for those of you that don't know the word beating, that means you're applying the makeup to the foundation to the face. But we're used to seeing, and I think in some areas can tolerate, the community can almost tolerate, even though they're saying they want you to be strong and masculine, they tend to tolerate the more effeminate gay person than they would if you were traditionally masculine. That flips people's minds. But we're going to take a break.
Yeah.
We're going to talk. We're going to peel some more of that back. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back.
The police called after midnight when they caught our son at a drinking party. It was a real wake-up call. My wife and I are really worried. We don't know if our son has a serious problem or if he's just hanging around with the wrong crowd. How do we know what to do? The police officer who brought our son home suggested we try Al-Anon family groups. He said it might help to hear how other parents are dealing with alcohol problems. I didn't want to go to an Al-Anon meeting. I didn't want anyone to think we had problems like that. And I didn't think our son's problem was that bad. When I decided to give Al-Anon a try, I found it was a safe place that keeps your problems private. It was very helpful. Are you troubled by someone else's drinking? You might be surprised at what you could learn in an Al-Anon family group from people just like you. Call 1-888-4-AL-ANON or go to alanon.org.
Cool party. What do you guys want to drink? Can I have a head-on collision with a concussion twist?
Make mine a fatal accident with no survivors.
And you?
A designated driver, please. You know, just a bottle of water.
Awesome.
You're a lifesaver.
Welcome back to the show. We were talking about black male identity, and we left on a very interesting point where we were talking about whether or not society tolerates a more effeminate character. And I was basing that on what we see as the image of a lot of black gay men. If you watch The Housewives of Atlanta or a lot of the pop culture that's out there, you're seeing a very effeminate image with a guy carrying a purse, a woman's pocketbook, or he's wearing 6-inch stiletto heels. And I want to say, first of all, I don't have a problem with any of it. It takes some courage to strut your stuff down the street in some 6-inch Manolo Blahniks. That's just that way that is. So more power to him. But I know for myself, I always enjoyed being a man. I was raised by a father, and I like being a man, and I'm comfortable that way. So you were saying?
Basically, what I was saying was that society has presented an image of the gay male as being this feminine guy into a lot of colors, into females' fashions and things like that. And what bothers me and what I discovered in my own community is the majority of us are masculine males. We work hard. We work in all types of jobs. You know, we're not going out looking for the easy job. You know, we are actually men. And to have that image represented all the time that this is who we are.
But at the same time, we're silent.
Right.
If I could put it back in historical terms, and I know I'm about to ruffle some feathers because a lot of you all watching hate when black gays equate their sexuality to the struggle of what it is to be black in America. But if you think about it, remember back in the day you had certain black people who could pass for white. Mm-hmm. And to make sure that they maintained their livelihood or their land or whatever they did, they passed for white. We got a lot of brothers that can pass for straight.
Absolutely.
And enjoy the benefit and the privileges that come with passing for straight.
And I think it's important to say, I don't find it problematic that there are feminine gay men on television because I personally believe that we all have something. You cannot find a straight man and a gay man, so we all have something. There are going to be variations of it. But with that being said, I think that it's important to have balance. It's okay to have the effeminate personality on television and in media, but we also need to see the other personalities within the gay community.
Exactly.
And so I don't know if it's so much that the media is manipulating it and we only see the feminine character. I think that what's happening is, or personality, I think what's happening is that's the only image that they identify as gay. Like they don't really know, to your point, that...
How not, when some of them are back there writing the stuff and styling and
well, no.
else.
What I'm saying is I don't know if, to your point, if there are gay men who can pass as straight, perhaps there isn't this overwhelming perception that there are comfortable gay men who can pass as straight who are living in the light. Because most of the men who can pass for straight aren't living in the light. They're DL, down low, or straight identified, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that it's important to, because after all, the queen, to use layman terms.
That's what we call the effeminate.
The most feminine character, or personality, has paved the way. Because the queen couldn't hide. The queen could not, has no other choice but to be visible, but to be seen. And so I think that it takes an incredible amount of courage. And to your point, I think that they have definitely been trailblazers for the gay community. But I think it's important that others of us come out and stand and hold that mantle because they've been doing it alone for so long.
And I want to put this disclaimer out there. Some of you may be wondering why we don't have a lesbian or a transgender person. We started off, this conversation was about black men, and so we're going to get to, that's why it's a series, that we're going to get to the different characters that make up all the different facets that make up the black community. So I just want to put that out there. But while we're talking about terms, you mentioned queen, let's bring them through Gay 101 with some of these terms that we use. Like I said, some of y'all don't like the word African American, you're black. Some people are Afro-American, you know what I mean? We've been colored, we've been a whole bunch of things. And the same thing is true with the sexual diversity in people. I know for me, I don't particularly like the word queer. I just don't like it. Don't call me no queer. I'm not feeling it.
I'm not peculiar.
All the different labels, because a lot of people have questions. You know, they don't quite understand. Well, you don't like being called gay, but you have sex with another man. Like, why is that? You know what I mean?
I think sometimes it's a matter of. It's not even just about preference. I think it's a matter of where people are in their walk in terms of being comfortable. For me, it's gay. But I know that, you know, there are other acronyms that have come out, MSM, men who have sex with men, because there are men who don't identify as gay because they don't live a gay lifestyle. And in this instance, I am using the word lifestyle.
They mean?
Go to gay parties, have gay friends, you know, socialize in gay circles, that kind of thing. But so they had to come up with other SGM, or SGL, same gender loving, you know, to encapsulate all of these people who didn't identify under the umbrella gay.
At some point, you just have to identify with self. You know, because all these different terms that are coming up, I'm never going to use a new term and identify myself. I'm an African American male who was born homosexual. That's what I say to a lot of times to people. I don't come out and say, oh, I'm gay, you know, or anything like that, because I don't identify myself with that. And if it's too many vocabulary words for my identification, well, then that's too bad, because that's what I accept for myself. I have a son out there, and I don't want people running up to him saying, oh, I heard your dad
Say
is
that
gay.
again.
You know, I just don't want people run up to him saying, oh, your dad is. I let him know who his dad is, and he considers his dad an African American male who was born homosexual. You know, all these other things, I was not born gay. I was born homosexual. I was not born SGL. You know, I was born homosexual.
What's the distinction for you between homosexual and gay?
Well, for me, there's no distinction because there's no distinction other than gay is not my birthright. Okay? So if heterosexual is the term for a person born straight, so to speak, then the term homosexual is for a person born
having an attraction
to the same sex. So if it's that, then when does gay become associated with the term?
Because what we're getting at is, and another reason why a lot of blacks don't like the word or had been hesitant to use the word gay was because it was a whole political agenda behind that word.
Right.
For a lot of our white counterparts. And so we know that there was racism in the country, and that racism filtered into the sexual politics. And so historically, black people would say, you know, I'm in the life. You know, they would refer to their people as friend, or there would be other clues that
family,
black people, family, there would be other words we use to identify ourselves.
But the thing about it is, okay, and this is why I said for another generation, we have to start really, really evaluating the terms and these words that we use, because our Webster's dictionary have different definitions for these terms. Gay means happy, means twig. So if you're calling me these terms and a kid goes and runs and looks at the dictionary to see what it means, and it doesn't mean that, then that's not, you can't associate it with a word that actually has a definition that identifies me. So a homosexuality has a definition in the dictionary that identifies me. Gay does not identify me in the dictionary. So that's why I said I do have a problem with the association of it, because it does not define us as a people. And we attach ourselves to these terms that we don't even create for ourselves. And we attach ourselves to them. In an argument, you'll call somebody that's a twig. That's what the definition is. So you're calling me a twig? I'm not a twig. So that's the reason why, only reason why I have a problem with us taking these terms and associating it with our identity.
Okay. Well, we're going to take a break, and I'm going to hold tight. We'll be back right after these messages.
The smallest moments can have the biggest impact on a child's life. Take time to be a dad today.
You say you'd give your right arm to be there for your family? Here's your chance to prove it. Have your blood pressure checked and control it to lower your risk of heart attack and stroke.
We're at the point in the show where in our Live to Tell segment where we talk with people, everyday people who are doing extraordinary things. And our guests who have been here the whole time, they are authors, as I mentioned before. And we know that oftentimes, if you can remember that scene in The Color Purple, where Suge and Celie had that little kiss, we know that oftentimes the first entry point to have tough conversation is through the arts. So our authors today are going to talk a little bit about their books and how you can get to know a world that you may not know existed through the world of literature. We're going to start with Craig Stewart. So, you got 2 books behind you.
Yeah.
Your latest release is?
One Thing for Certain, Two Things for Sure.
Okay.
And it just published in May of this year. So I actually just started the book tour for that. But my first book is Words Never Spoken. It came out May of 2012, so 3 years exactly before the second book. But I never even imagined writing a book. I moved to Atlanta 2 days after I graduated from Hampton University to write music, and that's all that I thought I wanted to do and could do. But at that same time, I was coming to terms with being gay, and the first guy that I fell in love with was HIV positive, so subsequent to that relationship, I ended up writing and producing a play called A Day in the Life. It sold out here, it flopped, sold out again. So I experienced a depression, but during that time of the depression, I founded a greeting card company. We were in 7 stores, and then the economy turned, each of those stores closed. And so I was just kind of living here in Atlanta, just kind of aimlessly, wasn't really writing. And so I got this whisper. It was like an instinct that told me that it was time for me to leave Atlanta, move to LA, and 3 months after I was there, I started writing the first book. Never even thought that I would write a book, but it became a purge for me, and I thought that it was just going to be about the 13 years of living here in Atlanta, but it was not. It was all of the things that shaped my life: my parents' divorce, my sister's drug addiction, my brother spent 23 years in jail, and then it was my coming out story. So for me, the backdrop of both of these books is my coming out story, but it's for the dreamer. These books are for the dreamer, anybody that's ever had their eye on a prize or a dream, and you're so close to giving up because there's no evidence that things are going to work out in your favor.
So as you've been promoting the book and as you've done the signings, what are you learning about the journey?
I am learning that the writing process was very cathartic, but the healing didn't come until I started having the conversations. And I realized that these books actually transcend gender, sexuality, race, all of those things. I was writing it with the intention of freeing myself. Mm-hmm. And I wrote these books because these stories hadn't been told. Hence the title, Words Never Spoken. So, excuse me, it was a very spiritual process for me. It was never something that I set out to do.
And speaking of spiritual process, I'm now going to turn it to Harrell. Your book is titled Church Boy in the Dark.
Yes.
Some people, when they hear that, think it's a play.
Right.
But what propelled you to write this book?
What propelled me to write this book was to give the heterosexual community pretty much that fly on the wall type of information that you get when you are privy to information that you normally wouldn't be privy to. There's a section in my book called Straight Up, the Homosexual Digest for the Straight World. And basically it's just a Q&A that answers a lot of questions that they have regarding our life, regarding the political side, lifestyle and living, church and spirituality, raising children, because we are parents. My son will be 25 years old and I raised him by myself. A lot of times they don't believe that. So Church Boy in the Dark gives them a perspective of our life as Christians, as well, because we are Christians as well. So that's the reason why I wrote the book for the heterosexual community, just to get an understanding of who we are, and then at the end of it all, we can love each other for our likenesses and not hate each other because of our differences. That was really my basis, is just getting everybody on an even keel. My book steps on everybody's toe. It just steps on everybody's toe, even our own. So we can all look at ourselves and say, I'm no better than you, I'm no different than you, whether I'm heterosexual, whether I'm homosexual, whether I'm black.
What has been the response that you're hearing so far?
So far, the response that I'm getting, mainly from heterosexual women, is that this enlightened them. It opened their eyes to things that they didn't know. It gave them another view of looking at even the Word of God and how it's interpreted, because I found some things that the only way you would understand it is if you were in our community and it's in the Bible regarding us. So I gave them a way of reading it and getting the interpretation not from the way your pastor taught it, but from the way it should have been taught, based upon not just the scripture, but the whole chapter. So I do break down the entire book of Romans in my book. Because
why did you select that particular gospel?
Romans talks about homosexuality, heterosexuality. It talks about the reason why we even have gay marriage now. But you wouldn't know it if you just pull out a scripture. But if you actually read the whole book of Romans and interpret the entire book of Romans, you'll understand that this is the season we're in. You know, when he talked about why he took the ability away from the church and gave it over to the state to determine who can marry. That's what's happening now, you know, in this time. So that's the reason why I did that.
Got you. And so just to get into your process, because many people often say they want to write a book or they have, I used to work with the DJ, Linda Clemens. She used to say, oh, there's a book inside everybody. You just sit down with yourself long enough. What was your creative process like? You talked a little bit about, you know, a little bit about it, but in terms of the nuts and bolts of making it happen.
Well, for me, it was very organic. Again, I was living in LA, and it was 3 months after I was there. I had moved to LA, and it just started coming to me because there had been several years before that I hadn't really been writing, even though I had written and produced this play and these greeting cards. So it happened for me at night. Like, I wrote mostly from 10 o'clock at night until like 7 in the morning. And it took me 9 months for the first book. So for me, I always talked about how I birthed this book, you know, and so.
So it sounds like you made time for it. You gave yourself a block of time, and you were consistent with it.
And I knew when I wanted to be done writing it. Okay. I had a cutoff date where I knew I'd be finished writing it.
And what was your creative process like?
Oh, do we have to go there? The first half of my book was written in 2002, and I thought I was going to die. You know, I was laying on my deathbed. As he spoke about, he met someone who was HIV positive. I met somebody at the time, and you know, my partner, he was not positive, but he stuck by me throughout that whole process. And I thought I was going to die. So I started writing the first half of the book thinking I was going to die so I could leave something here for my son. And I started getting better and getting well, so that wasn't the case. So I restructured the book and redirected the book, and 7 years later is when the second half came that actually got it to the point of being able to be published.
So where can people get more information about you and the book?
From my website, www.craigthewriterstewart.com.
All right, and yourself?
And you can get my book on Amazon at amazon.com and also at www.rosedogbookstore.com.
All right. Well, I definitely thank you all for joining me for this conversation.
Thank you.
And you know, you don't ever know where paths take you. Like many may not know that these two gentlemen, there was back in maybe about 10 years ago, we launched a magazine, JL Magazine, and these were both contributors to that project. So I just thought it was interesting that now I have you back as I'm coming back on the air. So that was wonderful.
Yeah.
So thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
We wish you continued peace and blessings in what you're doing.
Thank you.
And for you out there, I just want to say that you know, we don't ever know where we meet you at in the program, but one of the things that we do know is we want to pay our respects to Whitney Houston and Bobby Christina. We know that the family, as we take the show, has gone through a major tragedy. But what I want to say is you have to love yourself so much that you walk in your own truth, and you develop the personal freedom that will help you to be a blessing for somebody. And when I say freedom, I'm simple. I'm talking about that ability to not let anyone, even you, betray the own light that lives within you. So how about that? So stick around for other editions of The Round Table. I'm so glad you joined me. You can always find me on HenriHolmes.com or on Facebook /HenriHolmes. Thank you for joining the broadcast. We hope that you have a good evening.